everybody. Welcome to the Contemporary Fiction panel. My name is Carrie Schmidt. I'm the person behind Reading is My Superpower, Christian Fiction Readers Retreat, and Just Read Publicity Tours. And I am honored to be able to moderate the panel today. If you have questions, go ahead and put them in the chat box as we go through. And as I have a chance, I'll pull those out and ask. If not, we'll get to them at the very end. So I'm going to introduce the authors and then have them share a little bit about their featured book before we get into the questions. So I'm going to start with Pearl. Pearl Ada Pridham is the award-winning author of Something I Haven't Told You. She writes meaningful Christian women's fiction, which she hopes will inspire people with the love of God. Her home is on beautiful Vancouver Island off the west coast of Canada, where she enjoys walking on beaches with her husband and her little dog. Hi, Pearl. It's so good to see you today. Go ahead and describe Something I Haven't Told You using 3 adjectives for our readers.
Well, I I struggled with this one a little bit, but to try and condense it into 3 words, it's light and joyful, but it's about a serious topic, so poignant and evocative and compelling.
Yes, I love that. Wonderful. And would you say your genre is more romance, more women's fiction, general fiction? Contemporary is
It's
such a broad.
Yeah, well, generally it's women's fiction, but I several men have read it too and enjoyed
Yeah,
it.
yeah, great. Thank you. All right. Shannon Sue Dunlap lives in hot and humid Houston, Texas, where she writes stories with a dose of laughter and a spoonful of love. She earned an MA in journalism from Regent University, worked as a contributing writer for a Virginia paper, has published both fiction and nonfiction articles, and her Christian rom-com Love Overboard hit #1 on Amazon's contemporary Christian romance new releases list. Shannon is a diehard fan of happy endings and believes our Heavenly Father has designed one for each of us. And also, Cindy is putting information about their featured book and their website for each author in the chat, so you want to check that out as well. Shannon, my friend, describe Love Overboard in 3 adjectives.
Adjectives I would use for Love Overboard. Playful, swoony, and you said we could use a compound one, so
Yes, I'll allow it.
snort, laugh, inducing. Does that
Yes, this
count?
is true. This is true.
Oh,
Yes,
good.
that counts and it's accurate because I did. I snort laughed when I read Love Overboard. And usually when I read Shannon's books, I snort laugh. So Sarah Hanks is an award-winning author of Christian fiction in both the contemporary and historical genres. After spending over a decade mostly writing and teaching Sunday school curricula for churches in her community, she jumped into writing fiction full-time with her split-time novel, Mercy Will Follow Me. She and her husband have 9 children, a couple of whom seem to have inherited their mother's love for playing with words and crafting stories. Though Sarah dreams of a cabin by the beach, the family lives jammed together in beautiful chaos near St. Louis, Missouri, and she buys earplugs in bulk. Sarah,
Sure.
tell us about Braving Strange Waters. Describe that for us in 3 adjectives.
Um, the 3 adjectives for this baby, I think, would be adventurous, fun, and meaningful.
Oh, I love that. Great. And this is it a split time, correct?
This is a time slip, so
Time
it's time
slip. Yeah.
travel. Yeah.
Oh, time
All
travel.
my other
Okay.
ones are straight split time. This was the first time slip I've done.
Okay, great. That's fun. And Shannon, going back to you real quick, yours would be contemporary romance, romantic comedy for Love Overboard, correct? Okay. I just took it for granted everybody knows it because I do. So everyone
I've
should,
said it.
right?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, it's my fault. I didn't ask you the question. Malissa Chapin has a heart for writing stories filled with humor, faith, and truth. She's always adored reading excellent books and is tickled to see her childhood dream of becoming an author finally come true. Melissa loves creating with words, watercolor, fabric, and yarn. You can find her in her garden, at the piano, homeschooling her bonus baby, or enjoying a coffee with friends. Welcome, Melissa, and tell us about the road home in 3 adjectives, please.
Okay. This was a hard one. I don't know why, but I would say it's real, it's charming, and I forgot the third one. I'm sorry. I just
That's
looked
okay.
and I totally forgot. So there you go.
Real and charming. That's good. And what genre would you say? It's most
Um, it is a dual timeline, but I would say women's fiction.
women's fiction dual timeline. Okay, great. Sharon Tweet is a mom, a homeschooling veteran, a widow, an author, an amateur photographer, a child of God. From the shores of California to the rolling hills of Missouri, Sharon has traveled many roads through theater, archery, and even her husband's cancer. She resides in the Kansas City metropolitan area, writing, editing, and helping others bring order from chaos. Sharon writes contemporary Christian romance with an overriding desire to share a love of God's word through written fiction and encourage readers to discover love on purpose and to live your faith boldly. Sharon, tell us about remembering days of love in 3 adjectives, please.
Reflection, storytelling, and flashback.
Oh, I like that. So is it a dual timeline in a sense with the flashback?
I guess so. Yeah. Yeah. We've got one character. So it's book 4 in the Days of series, and it's one of the characters telling stories to the grandkids, and so there's a lot of present day, but then his story goes back to flashback.
Okay, wonderful. And last but certainly not least, Mr. Chevron Ross is a pseudonym for someone unimportant. He is not a writer, but God keeps putting ideas into his head that somehow turn into stories. I love that. Chevron, tell us about the Samaritan's patient in 3 adjectives, please.
Well, it could be kind of misleading, I suppose, if you just confine it to 3 words. But the best words I could come up with were warm, tense, and empathetic.
I like that. Warm, tense, and empathetic. And would you say it's more along the lines of like a general fiction?
I would say it's a general Christian fiction.
Well, right, yeah.
Because there is a Christian theme at the foundation of every book that I've done.
Yeah.
And this one's no exception.
Wonderful. All right. Just as a real fun question, just to get started. What is your favorite food that you only eat this time of year during the holiday season? Sarah, I'm going to start with you.
Chocolate chip pumpkin bread. Something that I only make around now, and we eat so much of it that we don't want to eat it for another year.
Yeah, exactly. As with so many things in the holiday season, right? Shannon Sue Dunlap, what about you?
I have to use all 3 names. Just call me Shannon.
Well, because I have Sharon and
Oh, that's
Shannon
true.
and I don't want to get us confused. So
Call me Shannon Sue then. That'll make me feel
Shannon
like I'm
Sue.
5 again.
Yeah.
When they call me that.
Shannon Sue, what's your favorite food?
My grandma has this great cranberry salad recipe for around Thanksgiving time, and they don't sell cranberries, all year round, that you can get them easily at least. And so you mix the cranberries with Jello and walnuts and pineapple and celery, and it's this crunchy, sweet, delicious goodness, especially with turkey.
Yes, my mom makes a similar recipe. It's been in our family for a long time. So yeah, that sounds very similar to ours. I don't like cranberries, so I don't eat it. But she makes it. She's like the only one that eats it. Sharon, what about you?
I don't make it very often anymore because we don't do a very traditional Thanksgiving or holiday meals anymore, but I'll make a homemade yeast roll, and they're so good. My mom used to make them growing up, and then as I had my own family, I kind of took over the mantle of baking the rolls, and all the family and friend events. That was kind of what I brought. So they're definitely a treat to have and enjoy when I do make them. I just don't make them every year anymore.
Yeah, they're pretty involved, I imagine.
It is a labor of love, kind of time consuming, but so good.
Yeah. Melissa, what about you?
Well, first of all, I love hearing that people love cranberries because we grow lots of cranberries in Wisconsin. So I picked a Wisconsin delicacy, which is called kringle. It's kind of an oval Danish pastry with tons of layers and butter and delicious fillings. But that's actually our Christmas morning treat. We buy it, but it's delicious.
Yes, I remember kringles. I grew up in northern Illinois, almost in Wisconsin, and
Okay.
we
Yep.
got some of those occasionally too. Pearl, what about you?
I wrote down pumpkin pie as my answer, but oh boy, all these other things sound wonderful too. And
We're all
also
getting hungry now.
we bought a small loaf of Christmas cake with marzipan icing, and boy, that's been going down well too.
That sounds delicious as well. Chevron, what about you?
I'm kind of like Pearl. I really would have picked pumpkin pie because it was the only thing I could think of, but I thought, well, everybody's going to say that. So I decided to pick something that I like all the time, and that's minestrone soup.
Mm.
Oh, yes. My husband's a big fan of minestrone soup too. Excellent. All right. Well, now that we're all hungry, um, Chevron, I'm going to start with you with this question. Where did you get the idea for the Samaritan's patient? Is this and was it typical or kind of atypical of how you normally get inspiration for your stories?
This is my third book, and I don't like to call it my book. It's God's book, but every book that I've done, all three of them, has been something that God put into my head. This one came about when I was watching a newscast one night, and they were interviewing two reporters from the New York Times who had done an in-depth story about a website that encourages people to commit suicide. It was one of the most shocking things I had ever heard of, and I couldn't stop thinking about it. And so God started putting ideas into my head about this, and the first image I got was a girl standing on a bridge wearing a prom dress, looking into the sunset. And the book just kind of grew from there. Basically, this girl turns out to be a girl who is 17 years old, and she has created a website for her high school science project. And because she's having trouble at home, she decides that she wants to reach out to other people who are having problems and let them just kind of dump all their problems onto this website. And it starts out that way. That's how they all start dumping out their problems. But then they all start talking about they want to just give up and kill themselves. And her website goes toxic from that. And eventually the parents of some of these kids do commit suicide. And as a result, this girl who started the website becomes a target. And everything goes from there.
Okay. Wow. So it does sound very, very emotional, but I love how that news story just triggered that for you. Shannon, what about you? Shannon Sue.
Well, much like Chevron, I was watching TV one day. It was an early morning kind of news show. And there was this adorable, I think she was 80 at the time, year-old grandma or woman who actually lived on a cruise ship instead of a retirement home. And they showed her doing her daily thing, and she was dancing with the cruise director in his white uniform. And, she had all her jewelry in her cabin and just different things. And she was living the good life. And I thought, man, that would be good in a book or whatever it was. And I'm like, what if there weren't one woman? What if there was four of them? Oh, and they amused themselves by matchmaking all the young people around them. Yes, that would be good. And it just kind of grew from there. But it was inspired by a woman who truly did that. And the more I researched, there's actually a trend of older people living on cruise ships now.
Wow, that's fascinating. I love that. Pearl, what about you? Where did you get the inspiration for your book?
Yeah, something I haven't told you. It's centered around a young girl who finds herself pregnant. I had been working at a pregnancy center, and I was in between jobs, and I decided I'd always wanted to write, and I thought, my goodness, I'm nearing 60 years old, and I want to write something. And what to write? So I thought, well, I better write about something I was quite familiar with. And so at this pregnancy center, there were all different ages of women who found themselves in an inconvenient pregnancy. But I wasn't seeing any books, fiction about teenage Christian girls in particular. And I thought, okay, why not tackle that one? And so that's what it came out of. And subsequent to when I began to write, I also worked at a women's shelter for a few years, and I went back to the pregnancy center and worked there in a paid position. Previous one had been voluntary. And so anyway, I met quite a few different kinds of women of all ages who found themselves pregnant. And anyway, that's where it came from.
Oh, I love that. I love that personal connection. Sharon, what about you?
I wanted to wrap up the Days of series in a bit of a unique way, introduce the Six Packs families, but not write a big saga to end the series. So this gave me an opportunity to introduce 24 new characters and highlight their lives, but also set the stage for a possible sister series in the future. And also plant some Easter eggs in my anthology short stories in the Hawthorne Springs Christmas Village stories. And so remembering Days of Love is a little different than what I normally, or the way I normally write my stories, because it's written in flashback and we do that little bit of time jumping. So it's not my usual style, but it gave me an opportunity to tell a broader story of 3 families and 3 generations in a little bit more of a compact space. And I had so much fun writing it. Some of it I wrote in tandem with book 3, which is Six Pack Days of Intention, because some of the stories in Remembering Days of Love happen during Six Pack. And so I was able to kind of break away from Six Pack and go write this chapter that was going to become Remembering Days of Love and then jump back into the other one. So it was kind of fun.
That does sound like fun. Yeah. As long as you can keep it all straight. I think I would get lost in the, wait, which book am I writing over here?
Sometimes I had to wait a minute, where am I? Which story's going where?
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly. Melissa, what about you? What was your inspiration for the road home?
Well, a few years before I started, pursuing writing, I was driving home and this vintage pink Cadillac with 3 women laughing their heads off in the front seat went past me, and I was like, "Oh my gosh, that looks like the front of a novel." And then I was like, "I wonder where they were going, and I wonder what they were doing." So the road home does have a road trip, and they do take her pink Cadillac. So
I love that. And of course they were laughing their heads up. What else would you be doing if you're driving with
I
2 of
know.
your best friends through in a pink Cadillac, right? Exactly. And Sarah, what about you? What was your inspiration for Braving Strange Waters?
This is such a fun question, by the way. I love all these answers. Braving Strange Waters, actually, I was just finishing up edits for Fall Back and Find Me, which is very heavy. I mean, it's basically my story through chronic illness. Um, and I was on a cruise with my best friend and her friend, and it had I was like, oh, this interior reminds me of a steamboat. It had like this retro feel, and I love steamboats. And Michelle, my friend's friend, went in one elevator for some reason, and Renee and I went in another one, and we're going up to the top deck, and we get up there, and Michelle's not there. And we're waiting for Michelle, and we're waiting for Michelle, and we're waiting for Michelle. And I'm like, you know what? She's traveled back in time and ended up on a steamboat. I just know it. Um, so we spent the rest of the cruise just like brainstorming this whole concept of time sailing, where we go back in the past from one boat to another to complete a mission. And so it was just a really fun, um, light kind of break, even though it does address the subject of racism. It does address the border wars um, and border ruffians and all of that. But it was just kind of a fun way to brainstorm and go about it.
That does sound like fun. And of course, what other option is there if she doesn't come up? She has clearly gone back in time to yes, exactly. I love it. Melissa, I'm going to start with you for this question. What's the main theme that you would love readers to take away from the road home? Just don't spoil it for us.
No, okay. It's the truth will set you free.
Hmm.
So
I love that.
yeah.
Sharon, what about you?
Keep the memories alive. Tell the stories of the past. Share with your kids, your grandkids, And more than anything, live and love on purpose, always. Life is a gift. Tomorrow is not guaranteed.
Yeah, I love that. Let's see. Sarah, I'm going to go back to you. What about you? What's the main thing that you would love readers to take away?
I would say that you can be brave with Jesus by your side.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so true. And something we tend to forget, I think, in the midst of the fear. Pearl, what about you?
I'd say the forgiveness and love of God, and that He wants us to find joy in our lives, no matter where we're coming from.
Love that. Chevron, what about you? What's the main theme you'd love readers to take away from the Samaritan's Patient?
That God is always willing to give people another chance. And that actually happens to everybody in the novel, including the 17-year-old girl, uh, to a friend who betrays her, to the homeless people she meets, and even to the man who tries to kill her.
Yeah. And aren't we thankful for those second and third and fourth and fifth and 10th chances from God? Shannon, what about you?
Would be it's never too late to have fun, fall in love, or forgive someone.
Love that. I love how many of you talk about forgiveness and second chances. And I think that's one of the great things that all fiction can tell us. But I think particularly contemporary fiction does have a good opportunity there for that. So every author brings a unique perspective with them when they write, just like every reader brings a unique perspective when they pick up a book to read it. But what unique perspective do you bring to your books? And Shannon, I'm going to pop back to you.
Unique perspective would be kind of like living in the modern world with the mind of a 1940s granny in my head. I've always been a very old soul. Even when I was young, I loved to watch Gene Kelly dancing with Judy Garland around the screen. I listened to Frank Sinatra music. And so my perspective is very, everybody's been talking about time travel. I don't write that, but it's almost like somebody who's time traveled from that area and is interacting with the modern world and just bringing that perspective to it.
I love that. Sharon, what about you?
I actually think my faith is one of the unique perspectives that I bring to my writing. And then widowhood has a kind of intensified my perspective on embracing life and love and appreciating where one is. And I think that plays a role in what I'm writing.
Yeah, yeah. One of those perspectives you don't really want to have, but God can use anyway. Yeah. Chevron, what about you? What unique perspective do you bring to your books?
It sort of ties to what I said earlier about God giving people second chances, because I'm a perfect example of that. I had left the church a long time ago and only came back a relatively short time ago and realized how much I had been missing. And I've regretted that. It's been a profound disappointment to me personally of the path that I followed. But that's why that theme appears in all three of the books that God has written through me so far, is the theme of regret. And yet everyone in the stories uh, turns out all right because God is always looking over their shoulder.
Yeah. Yeah. I love that. Pearl, what about you?
Well, the first thing that came to mind is that I'm an older person. I just had my 70th birthday, and I look back on my life, and I've had all kinds of different experiences, relationship wise, and I've been through cancer, and I've been through a husband who died of cancer, and I'm on my third marriage, and um, different people in my family and friends have experienced all kinds of things. And so there's a lot to draw from to write.
Yeah, and a lot that other people are going through too.
Yeah, and also I've been a Christian all my life, ever since I was like 5 or something, old enough to understand about Jesus. And it's helped me through all kinds of things, my faith. And so I write from that perspective.
Yeah, I love that. Melissa, what about you?
I would also say my faith as well, but for the road home, two of the characters in the dual timeline are pastors, and my dad is a pastor. So I heard the gospel the very first time they held me and grew up Sunday morning, Sunday night, Wednesday night, writing about a pastor was not terribly hard for me.
Yeah, no, I'm a granddaughter of a pastor, so of a small country church. So I get it. Yeah, absolutely. That brings a whole unique perspective that I don't think people really can understand unless they've been there, but it allows you to write about that and kind of give other people a peek at what that's like. And then Sarah.
It's kind of a difficult question because I think it would differ with each book that I write.
Yeah.
But I would say probably just my outlook on life. My favorite thing to say to my husband is, "Let's go on an adventure." And I just feel like that's what I'm always saying to Jesus, like, "Let's go on an adventure." And it normally involves adopting a child. Um, but I've got to stop this. Uh, but in some way of just kind of taking a step out in faith and relying on Jesus for everything I need. So I think that comes through in each of the books, even though they're so different.
Yeah. Oh, I love that. So you all have sort of addressed this in talking about your faith and how that influences what you write. But why is contemporary fiction, whether it's romance, whether it's women's fiction, general fiction, time slip, dual timeline, but why is contemporary fiction that's written from a Christian worldview important in today's world? Who wants to start? I'll just open that up to whichever of the authors would like to start that question.
I think in a culture that is increasingly saturated with anti-Christian themes and attitudes and perspectives, I believe it is more important than ever to share faith-filled walk and how God can support and guide in life circumstances without being preachy. In the romance genre, it's even a more challenging task to combat the push for heavy steam and sex and violence in the writing. And I'm excited to see the boom of the clean reads movement on Instagram, and pray that we can just continue to once again make clean romance, clean Christian fiction desirable again. But I think it's so important.
I find it interesting that just from a reader's perspective and an influencer's perspective, that as the culture does become more and more secular and far from what God has called us to, that there is this movement of people wanting clean reads, that they are gravitating toward those more clean and Christian, spice free is the one of the terms, no spice. I find that dichotomy interesting, and I think it's a great time to be writing this genre. Melissa, what about you? What do you think?
I would probably echo that. I think the world is so dark and the news is dark and movies are dark and some of the topics in popular fiction, I think, why do you want to read this? But I think it's just great to have some entertainment, but that it has some truth and things that maybe mirror real life, even though it's fiction, that you can also hand to teenagers or your grandma, and that it's just wholesome and reminds us about God and just maybe take a break from all the ugly in the world.
Yeah, absolutely. Before I go to the next author, I just wanted to remind you all, if you have questions in the audience, go ahead and put them in the chat, and we'll get to those in a few minutes. Pearl, what about you? Do you have anything?
Yeah, I like what the previous two people just said. My comments would be similar, that contemporary fiction is popular, and as Christian readers, we need that. We need to be able to have some books that we won't find offensive, and other people will read the books too and may find Jesus in them.
Yeah, absolutely. Sarah, what about you?
I write Christian fiction. And I absolutely positively see great value in Christians who just write clean fiction with not necessarily a faith thread, but something that, you know, you can pass along that has a biblical worldview without that explicit spiritual content. But I love Christian fiction. When I was younger, um, somebody gave the illustration, I think I was in middle school, and they said, if there is a building on fire and you had one bucket of water and there was a group of sleeping firemen right next to you, where would you throw the water? Would you throw it at the building or would you throw it at the firemen? And that just like an illustration to me that I keep with me of the value of encouraging the body of Christ. And in I'm not saying that everybody's asleep, but in dousing the body of Christ with encouragement to draw close to the Lord, so that they can then be infilled to go also touch the world around them. I see great value in that.
Yeah, that's a great illustration. I love that. Chevron, what about you?
Well, I hope that the people who read the Chevron Ross books would see in the characters and their plights that these characters are dealing with problems that we all deal with at one time or another, and that there is an answer in Christ. There's an answer if you just take it to God and ask for an answer. You may not get the answer you want, but you will get His answer. That's the one you need. And I think that's what the characters in these books find if they're willing to listen.
Yeah. Shannon, what about you?
I like what Melissa said about taking a break from the ugly in the world. And it also kind of reminds us that God didn't create the world in ugliness. It was beautiful and it was innocent to begin with. And I think some people look at Christian fiction and they might just say, oh, that's not relevant. It's not reality. That's not what life is like today. But it is reality. It's God's reality before sin got everything twisted. And so what we're holding up is the truth, and it's the lie that everyone else is believing. So we're really holding up the truth for everyone to see what it could be and what it should be.
Yeah, that's great. And that leads in perfectly to my next question, which is, you know, when you're creating your characters in your story, how do you make them relatable to your target audience? Um, because like Shannon said, a lot of people think, well, Christian fiction, it's not relevant to me, especially if they're not a Christian and they're looking in, or they are a Christian and they're like, I get enough Jesus at church and in my own quiet time, why do I want to read, you know, fiction? So how do you make your characters relatable to, you know, to the everyday Christian who wants to do their best to follow Jesus and fall in love with him and tell other people about him as well? Melissa, what about you?
Well, one thing I would just say is I try to write characters that I would be interested in reading.
Mm.
So my books they do have some hard topics. Like The Road Home, the one main character was a foster child and lost her caretaker, her grandma, and then the other main character was infertile. So not necessarily going on fluffy topics.
Mhm.
So I don't know if that's a good answer.
Yeah, yeah, it's a great answer. There are people going through things like that need to see themselves in fiction as
Right.
well. They need to feel seen. Yeah. Chevron, what about you? How do you make your characters relatable to your target audience?
Well, I wish I could answer that, but since God created the characters, He does all the work. And I can't answer because all I know is every time I sit down to the computer, this stuff just comes pouring out of me.
Yeah,
And he just makes everything relate to everything else. And it's like I'm reading a book instead of writing it. That's
yeah,
the closest I can come to describing how these characters come to life and how they relate to his purpose.
yeah. I love that. Pearl, what about you?
I try to write characters that are like real people who have real emotions and are not perfect and um, get sad, get angry, have longings.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sarah, what about you?
I was going to say about the same thing, just writing flawed characters with wounds that believe lies. I think every human on the planet has wounds and has believed lies, and there's always something that people can relate to if we're not writing perfect characters.
Yeah, absolutely. And I don't think anybody wants to read about perfect characters. I think we like the more kind of flawed they are, the more interesting they are, right? Shannon, what about you?
The same thing about writing the flawed characters. I want to write characters that are likable enough that you want to hang out with them. They do have good in them, but not so perfect and always saying the right thing and doing the right thing that they just don't seem real. They just seem like a mannequin, like a pretend person. So making them real but likable.
Yeah. Sharon, what about you?
This was a hard one for me to think about. Like some of the others have said, I kind of try to be the character that I'm writing and feel it and see it and all those things from my own perspective and how that would actually flesh out in a scene as I continue to hone my craft. It's also asking myself the questions in my character development. I do a lot more fine tuning when I'm editing, as I'm bringing a scene more to life, further enhancing the relatability of the character, but doing a lot of that fleshing out of different. I love World Anvil when I'm doing my character building and my world building in preparation for my story. And as a planter, I find myself, right? I find myself just discovering something, a need for an emotion or an action for a character when I'm in the middle of a scene. And so I'll have to kind of pull myself out and go find out more about my character. And a lot of the World Anvil gives a lot of prompts for as you're building a character, which is kind of fun. And or just myself, it's like trying to figure out who this character is, how would this character react or respond to a certain situation, and just continuing to build that character, but kind of trying to have that perspective of from my eyes, what that looks like, even though they're very different from me, which can be hard.
Yeah. Now, for people who might not know, what is World Anvil? Is that a website or
World Anvil is an online world building platform that's awesome for regard. It was originally created for RPG gamers, but it has been widely adopted by authors for that very reason, for world building, character building. You can do timelines, you can do um, uh, family trees. You can make some of it publishable. There are so many things that you can do. You can get lost in it and I have oodles of fun when I'm working, building my characters. And I mean, I write contemporary, so I'm not right. If you're a fantasy writer, fabuloso, because there are so many extra little things that you can do, different modules within it. You can even write in it actually, and publish through it. So I could talk for a long time about it, but I'll stop.
We had Pat Simmons asked Sharon if you could share a link to that website in the chat.
Absolutely. I actually opened it up, so
I was ready someone else did. Question. Margot did. Thank you, Margot. Yeah. Okay, we have a couple minutes left. Are there any questions? Oh, okay. Cindy said, if you're willing to answer, have you ever based a character on someone you met in real life? Don't
you read that copyright disclaimer on the back? It
says you're not. This has nothing to do with real people. Yeah. Let's see. Shannon, have you ever based a character on someone you met in real life?
Which ones have I not based on people in real life? More like,
easier to answer.
I don't usually, take and be like, this person is so and so. It's just that I draw inspiration from the people around me. Although I will say the Lone Star Sweetheart book that I wrote, my Aunt Karen read it and she told my dad, she's like, Jim, this sounds just like me. And after I read it, after I'd written, I was like, wow, this sounds like Aunt Karen.
An accidental inspiration.
I can't remember now if I did that on purpose, like I'm going to write somebody like Aunt Karen, or if it just turned out that way, but she was a lot like my Aunt Karen.
That's funny. I love that she recognized herself in it. Yes. Any of my other authors want to answer that question?
My last book New Creations was directly about my grandpa. So
Oh,
that
I
was the
love
first
that.
time I did that. It has three timelines. In the 1960s timeline is all of his old stories that he's told us um, for years. And then the
Yeah.
middle timeline was me as a child. And then the modern timeline is completely made up. Um, but I did have that. It's like even in the modern day timeline, I'm like keeping his character the same, and I think this is exactly what he would say in that situation. So that was hard because I didn't feel like I had as much creative license as normal because I wanted to get it. I wanted to honor him and get his, history right. But it was also so much fun to have my family read it. But
That's
that's the only
fun.
one I've ever done directly. I think
Uh-huh.
like she said, that it's a lot of indirect basing off of people's personalities with some tweaks.
Yeah. Great. All right. Is anybody else have a question before we close? Okay, real quick, authors, tell us what's coming up next for you and where you can be found the most. Sarah.
What's coming up next? The next book that will come out will be my third Sister in Arms book, whatever it takes. That's not until April. And that's the one that I highlighted last year with the Secret Civil War Soldier. And then right now I'm working on the second book to this series. So the next book after Braving Strange Waters.
And where can readers find you most? Most
Uh,
frequently.
Facebook, Instagram, website. Yeah.
Okay. Chevron, what's coming up next for you?
The next book is very much in the developmental process, so I'm not really ready to talk about it, but I can be found at chevronross.net, and I do have a presence on Facebook and also on Sarah Hank's website, Brave Authors.
Great. Melissa?
I am working on a sequel to The Road Home, and it's about one of the characters who was a small character who made herself a big character while I was writing. And then people wanted more of her story. So I'm working on that. And then my fourth in my series of my cozy mysteries.
Oh, yay. Sharon?
I I just released the first in a new series. It's called Finding Focus Across the Pond, and it's the Finding Second Love novella. So I just released that one, and it's starting a new series. So I'll be working on book 2 for that series.
Okay, great. Pearl?
This was my debut novel, something I haven't told
Yay.
you, but my publisher wanted me to do a series based on this one. So I did a prequel, and also now I'm working on the third book, which the prequel was mostly from the point of view of the main character's father, and
Okay.
it's a short story, just an ebook. And the third in the series will be a full-length novel, and it's from the point of view of the grandma, and it's kind of a dual time when she reflects back to her
Uh-huh.
young years.
Oh, wonderful. Shannon?
My 4 matchmaking golden girls from Love Overboard are coming back in May,
Yay.
and that sequel is called Hearts Away. And in that one, they're up to their old matchmaking tricks when one of their sons, who is a single dad, comes on the ship,
Oh,
and they're
boy.
busy trying to set him up with the child care specialist on the boat and catch somebody who's blackmailing one of them at the same time. So I'm looking forward to that one.
That sounds like fun. All right. Well, thank you all so much. There is a question. Is it necessary for novels to reflect historical accuracy, I guess, even in contemporary fiction? Or can the novel just be an exercise in creativity? Does someone have quick thoughts on that?
I think it's like
Sharon did. Okay. Yeah, go ahead, Melissa.
it's important to get your facts right.
Yeah, for
So
sure. Yeah. All right.
I just said that you kind of lose, you run the risk of losing integrity in your story if your historical facts and figures aren't correct. that it's otherwise it's important. You also run the risk of pulling your reader out of the story if they're like, what? That's what? And now I'm going to go fact check myself, and now I've lost my reader from the story. I don't write historical, but if that's kind of your goal, if you're looking at fantasy with some historical, you have a little bit more play with some history. If you're in fantasy, but if you're looking to be writing a historical piece, then I think you need to be historically accurate.
Yeah. Thank you all so very much.